Right on, folks. If you're looking for a short video, this is not it. I go into great detail on applying an epoxy finish and sanding it. Then I apply several coats of polyurethane, and to top it all off, I polish this amazing piece of spalted alder with buffing and polishing compound. Get some popcorn because here we go. Alright, so as far as sanding grit goes, I started with 60, I went to 80, I went to 100, I went to 150, now I'm going to 220. Now I've also worked up all those grits with the hand sanding on the perimeter, on the edges, getting everything together nice and smooth. And I'm going to work this up to 500 grit. Now you say, oh, maybe that's a little excessive, but I tell you, when you put the epoxy coat on here, the last thing you want to see is all these little half-moon circles from the random orbit sander come out underneath your finish, and it's really hard to get out once you put the epoxy on top. So taking it to 500 is actually not that excessive of a thing, and it's going to look really good, especially if this is hanging on a wall and it has some lights on it. You don't want to see all those little scratches in there. Now for filling the voids on this piece of wood, I like using this aluminum HVAC tape to tape from the bottom, and then I'll fill those voids with epoxy. All right, right on, folks. Total Boat tabletop epoxy. This is an easy epoxy to use, 1-to-1 mix ratio. You can see here that I have this sitting on a heated mat. This is a mat that's used for germinating seeds. You can get this on Amazon for a few bucks. I got the epoxy sitting on this overnight to bring it up to temperature. I got the room temperature between 70 and 75 degrees. I got 2 small cups here, 1 bigger cup. I'm gonna fill these both up, one with hardener, 1 cup with the resin. All right, here's our 2 equal parts. And now I'm gonna put these both into this cup. I mix it with the cordless drill, slow speed. You want it to go clear, and that takes about 5 minutes to get it nice and clear. You don't want to incorporate a lot of air in there, a lot of bubbles. And just a quick note here, if you want to get rid of all the bubbles, you can put this container into a pressure pot, and that will remove the air bubbles. I don't have a pressure pot, so I'm just mixing it, and then I'm going to pop all the bubbles with a torch. All right, first step is to fill all of these cracks and voids with epoxy. Sometimes this can take a few times. I fill this up, and then I use the torch here to pop any of those bubbles that are coming out and to let this settle down into those cracks. A quick note on the roller that I'm using. You can see a close-up view here. I get these at West Marine, the 9-inch rolls, and then I cut them into 3-inch segments and put it on this little roller here. I also use these little chip brushes, but I use the CA glue method where I put some thin CA glue around the bottom here, and then I cut the bristles a little bit shorter. Definitely have a MAP gas torch ready to roll. One of these trigger ones, that's the one you want right there. Got the epoxy ready to roll. Let's do the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Drizzle this all over our piece here, just like melted chocolate. And I tell you, this stuff is nice and warm. I leave a little bit in the cup. I got maybe an inch worth. I'm just gonna start rolling out a nice thin coat. I don't want to move the roller too fast. I don't want to incorporate a whole bunch of air bubbles. I kind of go slow. It's not like we're rolling paint here. We're just spreading out this epoxy. Okay, you can see I have a light set up here at an angle to the piece, and that's so I can see the glare on there, and I get down nice and low and I see if I missed any spots. So I start looking around for dry spots, and you want to touch those up right now. Sometimes the wood will start absorbing in different areas. If there's more porosity, it will suck the epoxy in, and you got to add more to those areas. All right, now it's time to grab the torch and pop any bubbles that are in the finish. You want this trigger style, and you just want to pull the trigger kind of quickly and just give it a quick hit with the torch. And you see all these bubbles just start to pop. All right, now it might be kind of hard to see on the camera, but by using the torch, any undulation in the finish, this is helping to heat the epoxy and to help self-level the epoxy so it becomes nice and flat. You're also popping bubbles with the torch. Some of those bubbles are coming from within the wood itself. Other bubbles might be in the finish from the mixing, but this gets out just about 99% of all the bubbles, and you get a nice clear finish. Now I'll come back every 5 minutes or so. I'll look for dry spots in the finish. I'll add a little bit more epoxy to those spots where it's absorbing more into the wood. I'll use the torch because more bubbles keep arising as you go. It tends to go on for about a half an hour, and then I just kind of leave it alone. Denatured alcohol is what you want to wipe down here after you sand. You want to get all this stuff off. After this dries, I'll blow this with the air gun. All right, while you're wiping this down with the denatured alcohol, this is a great time to get down low. Look at this at an angle with a light, and you can see if there's any sanding scratches that you need to get out. This will kind of reveal some of those scratches, and you can work on those areas if need be. At this point in the sanding process, I have worked my way up to 1,000 grit. So 220, 500, 800, and 1,000 grit. All right, now it is time to put on the top coat, and the product that I'm going to use is the Daly's Profin. This is one of my all-time favorite products to use on wood. It makes an amazing finish, especially... All right, hold the phone, put on the brakes. We're going to have to cancel Christmas. No, but really, I did end up putting a few coats of the Profin on, but then I put the bright lights on this project from different angles, and I could see all these tiny little scratches, and I didn't like that. That was from the random orbit sander, and even though I went up to 1,500 grit, it leaves these little tiny C-shaped scratches. So I decided to shift gears, and I decided to hand sand this, wet hand sand this with water and sandpaper. I worked my way all the way from 320, 500, 800, 1,000, and 1,500 grit paper. At this point, I decided to switch to a high gloss polyurethane finish. And this way I could build up several coats and then sand and buff the finish to a high polished gloss. I'll show you how this whole process goes. Okay, first up, I have a Red Tree badger hair brush. This is a 3-inch brush. I have it soaking in paint thinner. It's been sitting in here for about 15 minutes. When I first put it in, I flex the bristles a little bit and trying to get all the air bubbles out of this brush. After soaking for about 15 minutes, the natural hair bristles are nice and soft. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift this straight up. I'm going to let the paint thinner run out of the brush. Okay, now with this newspaper, I'm going to run the brush along the newspaper and let that absorb the paint thinner out of the brush. I'm not flexing the bristles. I'm not trying to incorporate any more air into the brush. I'm trying to keep it out, so I'm not flexing the bristles. I'm just running this along the newspaper. I keep doing this until I get most of the paint thinner out of the brush. Okay, I've gotten out most of the paint thinner. Now I'm going to take this newspaper and put it into the wood stove. You don't want this stuff laying around the shop starting a fire. All right, next up, I have a 3-to-1 mixture of polyurethane and paint thinner. 3 parts polyurethane, 1 part paint thinner. I already have that mixed together in this container that I have labeled 3-to-1. I'm going to gently stir this just to make sure it's all incorporated. Just stirring very slowly, not incorporating any bubbles. Okay, now I'm going to put my brush into the polyurethane. I'm going to put this 3/4 of the way down into the bristles. I'm going to flex it just a little bit. I'm going to try to get any air bubbles out of the bristles. You see some of those air bubbles that are coming out of the brush are floating on the top of the polyurethane. Now I'm just going to let this soak in the polyurethane for a couple minutes. Now I want to pull the brush straight up out of the polyurethane. Let anything run out that just wants to drip out. You don't want to flex the brush on the side of the container. Just let it drip out. Okay, now I'm ready to apply this to our board. I've already wiped this down with a tack cloth. I've also used a rag with a little paint thinner on it to wipe down our whole surface. Now this piece of spalted alder I have sealed with epoxy. You don't have to do that first, but in this case I want to fill a bunch of holes with epoxy. That's the stage I'm at with this board. So now I'm ready to take our brush after it's been dipped in the polyurethane. I'm going to lift it up. I'm just going to gently set it down in the middle of the board. And now I'm going to start to slowly drag the brush at about a 45-degree angle, very slowly. I'm just going to drag this all the way to the end of the board. I can see no bubbles in the finish. This is looking absolutely amazing. Okay, now I'll come back to the middle. I'll lay the brush down, not quite where I started, but about a foot back. I'll lay it down at a 45-degree angle. And this puddle that kind of ran out, I'm going to drag that in the opposite direction. Okay, again, I'm going to dip the brush. I'm going to lift it out of the polyurethane, let the excess run out. Again, I'm going to drop it on the board and start pulling at a 45-degree angle. Again, laying down about a foot back from where I started, 45-degree angle. I'm going to go for the edge here. Couple bubbles, but they will pop. Alright, now I'm going to dry brush the whole piece. I'm going to start at this end, and I'm just going to slowly drag this all the way across the board. Very slowly, trying not to pause. Again, coming back to the end here, dropping it down. Just going to drag this along the entire surface, overlapping my last brush stroke just by a little bit. Alright, I'm not going to fuss with it anymore. That's it for the brush strokes. If you start to mess with it anymore, it's starting to off-gas, it's starting to get a little tacky. You don't want to run the brush through it again. You're just going to mess it up. Just let it go. If there's any bubbles, just let it go to the next coat. This is an interesting piece because it's finished on all sides. A very tricky piece to finish. So there's a little bit of run over onto the side. So what I have is a little bit of turpentine here. So what I have here is a little bit of paint thinner that I have on a rag, and what I'm going to do is just run this along the edges of this board and clean up any runs that have gone over the side. Now for these edges, I'm doing kind of a wipe on poly treatment after I do all the coats on these two big faces. Now, since I'm finishing this on all four sides, this is a very tedious process with these runs because sometimes they keep coming for, 15, 20 minutes. So you got to keep checking and wiping it down. All right, you notice for wiping this down, I'm using a little paint thinner and I'm using some high thread count bed sheets that I have cut up. You don't want to use that t-shirt material. Boy, that puts out these little fibers into your finish and they are just an annoyance. I do not like the t-shirt type deal, but a nice bed sheet with some high thread count, that is what you want, or some nice linen. And again, I've just got some paint thinner and I'm running this along the bottom because I know there's some drips along the bottom. You want to keep checking every so often, making sure to wipe those up if you are doing a project that has finish on all four sides. Okay, as far as cleaning the brush goes, I have 5 different containers here filled with paint thinner. Here's number 1, number 2, 3, 4, 5, and you can see the various shades. I've already been doing the other side of this board, and I've been cleaning the brush in this. So here is number 1. So I put this into the paint thinner in number 1. I just start flexing the bristles a little bit in here, trying to work out the majority of the polyurethane in container number 1. Now I also kind of like to just let that sit in there for about a minute. Now while that brush is sitting there, I'm going to mop up some more of these runs that just keep coming on the edge. Okay, I'll flex these bristles a few more times. Let this drain out. By the way, I've gotten a lot of these tips of doing this finishing from Paul's DIY Solutions. He's got a YouTube channel. Check him out. He's got some great videos on finishing. I'm following a lot of his process here. I'll put a link in the description. Be sure to go over to his channel and subscribe. Paul's DIY Solutions. He's got some great woodworking skills, finishing tips, and much, much more. All right, I'm into container number 2. Same thing, washing the brush out right here. You know, on and on. This just goes right down until we get to container number 5 and we get most of all the polyurethane out of the brush. All right, container number 4. After I bend the bristles a little bit in this container of paint thinner, I let it sit there for a few minutes before moving on to the last one, and then I go kind of wring out the brush. Okay, on to the last container. Get this nice and clean. This should be virtually clear, this last container. There should be no tint whatsoever. This is a pretty good representation here. We see from dark all the way to clear, just knowing that you got this brush nice and cleaned out. Now I watch Paul. He goes from here and he gets all the mineral spirits out just by kind of wringing it out, and then he goes to the sink and washes this with detergent soap in the sink and washes it about 5 times. Now what I'm doing here is, you know, I'm going to do another coat possibly at the end of the day today. So I'm just going to go kind of wring this out outside. Not wring it out, but I'm just going to shake it out. Get as much of the paint thinner out of this brush as I can. And then I'll bring it back into the shop here and I'll just hang it up. Okay, I let the polyurethane dry overnight. I have the shop nice and toasty warm with the wood stove. And here I'm sanding in between coats with 800 grit. I'm also using some water there. I wipe it all down. I check it for any little blemishes. I sand it again, and then I ultimately wipe it down with some paint thinner. I let that set a little bit before I put another coat of polyurethane. Ended up putting 8 coats on each side of this board. All right, folks, let's take a closer look here. I have several coats on each side of this board. I probably have about 8 coats on each side of this board, but I want to show you, I want to take a closer look. I want to show you some of the little imperfections. Let's see if I can get the camera to focus here. Yeah, see, kind of around the light here, there's some little bubbles here and there that are just kind of in the surface. And there's a couple little run marks here and there, little squigglies. And to get that out, what I'm going to do is use a buffing system, and this will be the final polishing of this. It looks absolutely phenomenal. There's just a couple little things in there, but now we're going to switch to this buffing system. Okay, before I switch to the buffing machine, I'm going to go over this whole surface quickly, first with some 1000 grit and then some 1500 grit, and then we'll get into the buffer. I'm going to use some water. We're going to do a wet sand on the whole surface of this. Now, this has been drying for about a week now. Got a good temperature going in here. I got the wood stove going. This is cured nicely. And now we're just going to sand this and just knock off any of those high spots with the 1000 grit. And with this 1000 grit, I just want to do linear strokes kind of all up and down this board. Now when you're doing the wet sanding, you can kind of see a little bit of a slurry form, and that way you know you're removing a little bit of material. All right, now I'm gonna wipe it down. I'm gonna look in the light and see where we're at, and if I have to do more sanding, I'll do more sanding. If I have to switch grits, I'll switch grits, but I'm just getting the slurry and the water off of the top here with some paper towels. Okay, I can see there's some little spots that I still need to get out. I'm actually switching down to an 800 grit, and then I'm going to come back up to the 1000 and then to the 15, because there's a couple little deeper spots that I want to get out. I'll be there for a while with 1000. The nice thing about starting with 1000 grit is that you're not introducing deep scratches right away. So if you try with a higher grit first, and then if you need to go down, you can go down. Okay, this is after the 800, and this is looking really good. There's a little area right there I want to address, and a couple spots in here, but for the most part, boy, this is looking really good. I remember my middle school teacher, he used to come to your woodworking project with a big pencil, and any spots that needed more sanding, he'd just, rub the pencil all over it, and there you go back to work, back to sanding. But, all right, I got a little bit more on this. I'll bring this through 1500, and then we'll switch to the buffer. All right, I'm just finishing up here with the 1500 grit, and I'm about to switch to the buffer. So I got all the edges done here. This is not for the faint of heart if you're afraid of sanding, because it's a lot of elbow grease going into this piece here. All right, I'm gonna start here with the polishing process, and I have these buffing pads that I'm gonna use on this Porter-Cable variable speed buffer sander. And these are just foam pads. I got the hook and loop system going on to the machine here. This blue pad, they got these designated here on the back. Blue, light cut, green, soft polish, black, fine finish. And you can use different polishing compounds. I am using the Novus system. I already have this here. You could use Meguiar's. There's lots of different compounds out there. Number 3 here is the heavy scratch remover. I could use a heavier cut pad, but I'm going with the blue pad here, and I'll show you how I do this. I put a little bit of water, just lightly mist this, and then I shake up the bottle of the heavy scratch remover here. This is number 3. And then I like to load the pad first here. I put some lines just like this. And I just kind of rub these in with my finger. And now I go with like 3 or 4 pea-sized globs, just like that. And then I make sure that this is on a low speed, right? And then I take the pad and just kind of dap it in a few places, just like this, to spread the compound out a little bit. And then I start it up. All that's doing there is just keeping it from spraying everywhere. So as soon as you get that going, you can turn up the speed. Now the important part is you don't want to let this dry out on the surface. That's why I don't mind putting a little bit of water in with this, even a little spritz on here. I'm going to load this up again. going with the 3 dabs. I'll come over here to this side, just go like this, dap this down, turn the speed down a little bit, spreading the compound around. Now we'll turn it up. Come on. Alright, now with a nice scratch-free cloth, I'm going to mist this whole thing down with some water and try to get rid of any of the heavy cutting compound, the number 3 cutting compound that I'm using here, because next we're going to switch to the number 2 fine scratch remover right here. So we don't want any of that old compound left on the surface. We want to get the fine scratch compound. So we want to clean this fairly well in between. All right, now I'm switching to the green pad, which is a soft polish pad. Make sure I get this centered on here nicely. And I'm going to use the fine scratch remover on the green pad. I'm going to clean it, and I'm going to use the fine scratch remover on the black pad. So I'm going to do the double whammy with these two. And this one, I'll do the same thing. Put an X on here, kind of work this in with my finger. Also put a few dabs of this. And I gotta say, this is some of the fun stages, because this board will really start coming alive. We're gonna start getting a nice sheen to it, and all the hard work is starting to pay off. All right, now I'm on to the black final polishing pad. I'm still using the number 2 fine scratch remover. You can see the sheen coming off of this already. It's just looking dynamite. I don't see any scratches in this thing at all. So now we're just going for the shine. All right, the last step here in the novice process is the plastic clean and shine. So I got a very nice soft cloth here. This is actually some bed sheets, and I'm just gonna spritz this down. All right, now that looks great with the plastic polish cleaner here from Novus. But then I'm going over here with the Cori Super High Gloss Piano Polish. So I'm gonna spritz this down. Now there's lots of ways to get a high gloss shine out of this. You know, you can do the Carnauba wax. You could wax this whole thing right now and polish it like that. And that's a nice way to do it as well. But right now I'm going with the Cori's Piano Polish. And we just kind of want to keep working this until it dries out. All right, let's take a quick look at it. This is as far as I'm gonna take it, and it is looking absolutely dynamite. It's almost hard to catch it in the camera here with the lights. If you were here in person to take a look at it, it's just absolutely stunning. Look at the character in this wood here too, just beautiful figuring in this spalted alder. What a nice piece of wood. Just fabulous. Look at these colors in here. I don't even want to touch it because you just touch it and you smudge it, right? This is the thing you keep highly polished, but absolutely gorgeous. A very tough project because finishing this on all sides and having runs go over the edge, you're constantly attending to this. After you put a coat on, you're running around for another 45 minutes just touching up runs that come down the sides. But beautiful, beautiful piece of wood here. Watch your top knot.